Alright, dickheads, I'm your chunky messiah, Ethan, and I'm just here with another episode of that there Tabletop Tall Tales. You know, this is the third time I've recorded this intro. I very nearly say on that there PC every single time. It's not on a PC. Well, you might be watching this on a PC, and I am recording on a PC, so there are means and ways by which this could be considered to be on that there PC, but let's not go down that road. But yes, this time I'm just going to be here talking about what I believe I mentioned in the last episode, in the Vladislav episode. I'm going to be talking about my Tremere character, Damien Saint-Claire. Going to kind of explain, what the concept of him as a character was, and then tell you about one really standout story, and then a bonus silly thing that we established in the campaign for him. And it's going to be a lot shorter than the Vladislav Mastiff episodes, largely because there's just not that much happened with Damian. It was a campaign that I joined partway through, like 2 sessions in. It was one of the most dysfunctional parties I've ever seen. I probably won't get into that all that much. I might mention why, or what I think made it so dysfunctional, but that's not going to be a main talking point. And the party, ended about 5 sessions in, which granted these sessions start at 1 in the afternoon and end about 3 in the morning, but it ended, a few sessions down the road. So it didn't go too far, this thing. I may, at the end, depending on how I feel, mention some stuff. I've got some stuff I want to say about dice, and a bit of advice for playing Vampire, specifically, inspired by something someone asked me in the channel's Discord. But also, isn't this a fucking really lovely dice cup? I bought, a bunch of the Q Workshop, Outer Gods, I think it was called, dice sets. I've got Azathoth, Cthulhu, Nyarlathotep, and Hasta the Unspeakable. And I just decided that since I had some spare cash, I could do with a nice themed dice cup. I'm always a big fan of stuff with Elder Signs on it. It's weird to me that I don't own a shirt with that on. Oh yeah, also 2 things I should mention. Number 1, this shirt's hideous. I didn't realise how fucked this shirt was when I put it on. Because it's what time is it? It's midnight. I was wearing pajamas. I'm still wearing, waist down, your boy's in pajamas, just so you know. Gonna break the illusion here. Almost every single time I've recorded a video, waist down, in pajamas. But I changed my shirt to one of the things I think is acceptable to wear outside when I record. This is not acceptable to wear outside. This is going in the pajama shirt pile. Because I bought, this and a Skaven shirt at roughly the same time. And the Skaven shirt's, okay, but this, unacceptable. It's supposed to be the Chaos sign. It's, falling apart. It's a nightmare. But yeah, that's a nightmare. And also, I've painted my nails, again, for the first time in, a couple of years, I think. I used to paint my nails all the time. Wanted to start again, now that I've basically finished university. Out of practice with applying nail varnish. So, got it all over my fingies, didn't I? And I haven't washed it off. Whatever. I'm the worst. Okay, so let's talk about Damien Saint-Claire. Let's get straight into it. Okay, so as I mentioned, Damien Saint-Claire was a member of Clan Tremere, and he's one of the very rare occasions on which I've played one of the so-called high clans. It's only honestly recently been pointed out to me that I seem to have an almost inherent, almost inbuilt hatred of the high clans of the Camarilla for some reason, and the high clans, in case you want to know, are the Tremere, Toreador, and the Ventru. I don't know, and it's not that I, actively hate them because they're high clans, it's just I happen to hate the high clans, because actually one of my favourite clans is the Malkavians, who an argument could be made for them at one point being a high clan. And I'm okay with the Bruja, who were also at one stage a high clan, but for some reason I just hate the current high clans. I don't know why. It's not helped by the fact that I can't stand the way that there is a justification for being elitist in the lore, when you're role-playing, and one of the people in my current party, really enjoys playing the high clans and leaning into that in a role-playing thing, and it drives me up the wall because I play kind of weird low clanners, which means there's a lot of friction there, and that's probably not helping. But yeah, it turns out I hate the high clans. Who knew? But yeah, so this is the one time I decided to play a high clan, and I decided to play a Tremere. Largely because I was just kind of interested in the way that, much like the Nosferatu, the Tremere are kind of a clan unto themselves. They're kind of a species unto themselves, a culture separate, like part of, but separate from the Camarilla. As you can kind of get just from talking to Maximilian Strauss in VTMB, it very much goes Tremere, like Clan Tremere, Camarilla, in terms of who they're loyal to, which is part of the reason why no one trusts them. The other reason that no one trusts the Tremere, of course, is the fact that they're filthy Diablerists, who were literally human mages, who cheated their way into being vampires by Diablerizing, well, not even Diablerizing, because they weren't vampires, but just by, in some vile ritual eating, I believe it was the Salubri antediluvian Sarlot, that they ate. I think it was him, to turn from human mages to vampires. Joke's on them, though, because vampires can't do mage magic. So they had to also very quickly invent thaumaturgy, which is literally them awkwardly attempting to adapt mage magic, like human mage magic, to work on blood, because whatever, mana or whatever human mages use to charge their spells, they just don't have it anymore as vampires, so they have to try and maths it to work on blood, which is interesting. Damien Saint-Claire was, as I say, he was a Tremere. He was the child of the Primogen, of the Tremere Primogen in New York, who was also the regent. Not always the case, but it can often be the case, but that's not always the case. Because the regent is appointed by the internal Tremere authority structure called the pyramid, whereas the regent, the regent's appointed by them, the primogen's appointed by the prince. Didn't necessarily need to be that, but he was the child of both, I guess. However, he didn't live in the Central Chantry, it was another New York campaign, thankfully not taking place chronologically after Mastiff of Vladislav. This was a complete reset, taking place, I believe it was in some kind of museum that the Tremere Chantry was based. I believe it was some museum, I can't remember which one. Damian didn't live in the museum, he lived in his own kind of external chantry, a secondary chantry, off in Brooklyn, which was hidden in interesting ways. The main chantry was hidden by, the standard, you go down a hallway, you get teleported to a different place, and there's gargoyles all over the shop hiding and observing you. Stuff like that. Damien's chantry had his own weird things. Damien himself was a bit of a peculiarity for the Tremere, because the Tremere tend to, he wasn't a peculiarity in the way he was sired, because most Tremere, the Tremere tend to sire academics, even academics who aren't necessarily occultists. They sire scientists and mathematicians, and yes, occultists, but they sire a lot of academics because you need to be brainy to do thaumaturgy, because thaumaturgy is basically maths applied to blood. At its base, even though a lot of it appears like, ooh, spooky and rituals and stuff, a lot of it comes down to maths. So you need to be academically savvy in order to actually be an effective thaumaturgist. So they sire a lot of academics, and Damien Saint-Claire was no exception. He was an academic. However, the gimmick of his character was that he wasn't just an academic. He was university educated. I can't for the life remember what he was educated in, but he was university educated. The goof with him was that he was a New Ager. But the thing is, he wasn't a real New Ager. He was a con man who was taking advantage of kind of the interest in New Age stuff to basically write books full of stuff that he knew was actively bullshit, like he knew was just not true, but that sounded nice, and selling them. Which was also kind of how he supported himself as a vampire, was he wrote these lies that were also super lies, because now he knew what magic actually was, so he explicitly, deliberately wrote shit that was almost the diametric opposite of what he knew magic to actually be, and then sold those books because he was within the age range where he could still feasibly be a living human. He also had a visual gimmick to him, in which he had the mistaken identity flaw, which is, in which you look very similar to someone else. And the character he looked very similar to was the city Barley, the one Barley, well, the one that we know of, the one Barley NPC that exists in the city. And if I believe I mentioned the Barley before, I have decided I am going to do clan videos, so I will talk about the Barley at some stage. But suffice it to say, Barley are basically chaotic evil, like comic book level bad guys, who worship demons and destroy things. And the city Barley was called the Dealer, and he leaned a lot into, I'll give you all of this power and wealth, but I get your soul, was his whole deal. And he wore a big black cloak, had white hair that was like kind of spiked up, and had Latin text tattooed on his face. I think he might have had red eyes as well. I'm not sure about that. I don't think he had red eyes, no. But he wore like a big black cloak and a black suit with a red tie. Damien Saint-Claire had white spiky hair, Latin tattooed on his face, but wore a big red coat with a red suit with a black tie, and his red coat had a big collar, as did the black cloak of the Dealer, so they got mistaken for each other quite often. Didn't really cause that much of an issue, except for the fact that he couldn't hide who he was, because he also had, I can't remember what it was, but he had something that made he stuck out like a sore thumb. Like, you could just tell who he was just by looking at him, especially because he had a few dots in fame. He got recognised all the time because he had this very distinctive appearance. But yeah, his whole deal, his whole personality was that he was more or less a good Tremere. He didn't want to be in the Chantry because he was paranoid. That was kind of the watchword with him, was he was deeply paranoid. He didn't trust anyone. He didn't want anyone to know where he lived. He didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. He didn't really share information all that well, and he was very concerned with kind of keeping the secrets of Clan Tremere. He also spoke in an awful kind of southern drawl, like a cartoonish southern drawl, because, as I've said many a time, I can't do good voices, but even a bad, broad, cartoonish voice is better than no character voice at all. I'm not going to do his voice, because it's genuinely been so long I can't remember exactly what it sounded like. I just knew it was like me attempting a bad southern drawl. Because he was, I believe I said he was from New Orleans. I think that's why, but he definitely didn't have a New Orleans accent. Not even, New Orleans, definitely not unacceptable what I just did. But he didn't have a New Orleans accent, but I said he was from like Louisiana or New Orleans or something like that. He was from that area. I can't remember what powers he had. He had thaumaturgy. I think that was basically the only thing I put any points in. Discipline-wise, was he had... I think he might have actually had 5 points in thaumaturgy, actually, for the sheer strength of the rituals he had. Because, as I believe I may have touched on this briefly at some stage, but I think I said that vicissitude is the most customizable discipline in the game. A close second, I'd say, is thaumaturgy, because thaumaturgy isn't one discipline. Thaumaturgy is theoretically, God only knows how many different disciplines that do a lot of fundamentally different things. I don't know them all off by heart, but basically for every dot in thaumaturgy you get to pick which thaumaturgical path you're actually putting that dot into. It's not like it is in the tabletop game. I mean, although there are some abilities similar to what's in Vampire the Masquerade, what's in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. Blood boil is a thing, but that's not the only thing you can get. You can get dots in Lure of Flame, which just allows you to summon fire in your hand and make other people lose their goddamn minds. And you can then throw it. Granted, the second you throw it, you also have to make a Rotschreck roll to see if you lose your mind, but as long as it's in your hand, you don't lose your mind. You can also, you can get, like, the Path of Mercury, I think it is, which is just straight up teleportation. And it can go, and like, the higher levels of the Path of Mercury are like, you could teleport to the fucking moon and back, you know what I mean? Like, it's huge distances. People with with high dots in the Path of Mercury can teleport. You got the Path of Mars, which is like buffing yourself, and then at higher dots is buffing your allies as well. There's all sorts of different thaumaturgical paths. And not only that, but with each dot in thaumaturgy you can also invest in what are called rituals, which aren't like the same, like the thaumaturgical spells, for lack of a better term, the discipline dots you get on your paths are immediate, you know what I mean? They're like, cool, Lure of Flame, wow, fireball, wow, but the rituals require certain objects, and they require time, and they essentially have a kind of broader effect, a less specific, well, not perhaps less specific, but a broader effect and a longer lasting. effect. And basically, I believe with every dot you get of the disciplines, you can you can also pick. You get for free, I think, an equal leveled dot of a ritual. I think there are ways to get extra ones at character creation, and you can just be taught them over the course of the game, as long as you have enough dots in thaumaturgy to be able to use it. You can just be taught it over the course of the game. But yeah, rituals do a lot of crazy shit. And Damien Saint-Claire's house was a load of rituals. Some, a couple high-level ones, and a few low-level ones that were surprisingly effective. And do not ask me to remember what the name of these rituals were. I cannot recall. But he had a lot of rituals. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what his house was. And what he had. Because the thing is, his secondary chantry wasn't actually massively impressive. It was literally just a house. It was just a townhouse in Brooklyn. I can't even remember which part of Brooklyn, but it was a townhouse in Brooklyn. He did have a butler. That was the thing. He had a revenant, which is basically kind of like a super ghoul, more or less. A revenant butler called Berthold, who the revenants are kind of... You're born a revenant. I believe you can be made into a revenant, possibly, I'm not sure how, but you are essentially born a revenant, and you have these long lines of revenant families that serve specific clans. I believe most of them serve the Sabbat, but the Tremere have there's not many of them left, but the Tremere do have a revenant family that serves them, and because my character was the child of a primogen, he had access to essentially the primogen's butler, who had been handed down. Good old Berthold. Drove really well, but drove very slowly. He's a good lad, Berthold. But, yeah. He had that. He had a car. He had two cars, I think. One for him and one for Berthold. But almost all the time, Berthold drove him around. His house, I think it had like a library, a study, a living room. It had a lot of basic stuff. Didn't have, actually, any connection to the internet or phone lines. Didn't have any of that. It did have electricity and water, though. And this was all because he was paranoid. In fact, in order to call him, you literally, if I recall correctly, every day... I'm trying to remember how I set this up. Every day at a certain hour, I think it was roughly half an hour after it was reasonable to assume most vampires would be awake, Berthold would leave, and he would go to another house, relatively nearby, which had a phone in it, like a room that had a phone in it, and he'd check the phone for messages, and you had to essentially call this number, and have Berthold check, and then Berthold would tell Damian, and then Damian would go, and he would call you back. That was the only way you got in contact with Damien Saint-Claire. He had a mobile on him, but it was always off when it was in his house. And he would only turn it on when he was a good distance away from his home. He did not want anyone knowing where he lived. Similarly, he didn't receive any mail. Like, I believe, like, we established that all of his, like, checks and shit got into a P.O. box, and no one knew where he lived. I honestly, I think one member of the party assumed he lived in Brooklyn. And the thing is, even when he left... Okay, are you okay, girl? You're making weird noises when you're sleeping, girl. Good puppy. Yeah, you could go. But I think one member of the party assumed he lived in Brooklyn. The thing is, even when Damian left his home, he didn't go by a normal route. Like, he'd get in the car. It took him, like, an extra 20 minutes to get anywhere, because him and Berthold would drive, like, a bizarre route to make it, and deliberately come from a different direction. Like, if you called him 3 days in a row to go to the same place, he'd come from a different direction every time. Even if you were meeting at the exact same spot, because he would just literally drive in random directions for a good 20 minutes before he'd turn up. Because he didn't want anyone to be able to figure out where the fuck he was going, or where he was coming from. He was, that's very paranoid. However, it wasn't just these kind of baseline levels of paranoia that, protected his home. He had some real crazy abilities, some very crazy rituals, one of which he definitely shouldn't have had access to, but the GM allowed it because I spent the points for it, and it helped the goof, so he allowed me to get away with it. But he had some really crazy rituals. on that house, which honestly, in hindsight, could have caused problems. Because of just how difficult it made finding his house. Like, if an enemy managed to find his home and attack him, reinforcements could not help him. Because, like, they just would not be able to find him. Even if they, like, got a rough idea of where his house was, they wouldn't be able to find him. Let me tell you for why. Okay, so... he had... I can't remember exactly how many rituals. He had some kind of innocuous rituals applied to his home. There was one that essentially stopped sunlight from getting in. He had that. There was another one that turned fires on the premises green, and stopped them from causing rot shrek, so you could have, like, sconces and stuff. Whenever you see, like, weird magic fire in something in Vampire the Masquerade, chances are that's what's happened. Like, it's had that Tremere ritual cast on it, otherwise you would be freaking the fuck out. In Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, for some reason, none of the vampires care about fire, even though that's a fundamental part of their psychology, but whatever. But, I'm not mad. I'm furious. No. But yeah, he had that cast, so he had, like, sconces burning in the chandeliers and stuff, you know. He had nice-looking decorations. But really, the creepy, strange stuff that he had, only... The creepy, weird rituals were really the ones that were hiding his house. And those ones were... I believe these were two separate ones. He had... Actually, no, I think the one I think this one I'm thinking of is two separate rituals. I think it might have actually just been the same ritual. Yeah, I think so. I also remember how you performed this one, more or less. So he had one that literally took his house off of all documentation. There was no record of this address existing. And basically, how you did that was, I believe you wrote a letter with the address of the house, in blood, and did some, like, voodoo shit to it, and then just put it in the postal system. And somehow that would just kind of, over the course of, like, a couple of weeks, would destroy all records of your home. And specifically, actually, in such a way that if you didn't draw too much attention to it, the water and electricity companies wouldn't turn off your water and electricity, because they wouldn't have any records showing that it's even going anywhere. Like, they wouldn't know... Like, you know, they wouldn't know that there was this bill that's not being paid, because there's no record of there ever being a bill. There's no record of the fact that any water or electricity is going there. Which is why he still had lights. Was because, you know, he just wasn't in the system. And the other one, because honest to God, okay, now, the next two parts, I genuinely can't remember if they are the same ritual. I think they might have been the same terrifying ritual. Because that one, that I just told you, weirdly basic ritual. Super basic. He might have also had a ritual which I think is called Seal the Egress, which is basically, it hides the door. I think he had a couple of doors in his house that were sealed like that, in case anyone ever got in. Like, in case he, for some reason, had a guest round, he'd, like, hide his private study. So basically, literally, the old classic of it just looks like a flat wall, but if you know there's a door there, you can get through. That was, I think he had that in a couple of places inside his house. Never came up, because no one was ever inside his house unconscious for any length of time. No one who didn't already know the layout of his home, and didn't already know where his shit was, because a couple of the NPCs, like, higher ranking Tremere, who were allowed in, like, he couldn't stop them from coming in, they knew their way around the house. But, you know, he had, the one time he had another guest there, they weren't exactly in a position to go looking around his house, but he had Seal the Egress anyway, so he could, it's hidden away. But his final thing, and it's bullshit that he had this. It's total bullshit that he had this. I think I had to take, like, a boon or something in order to justify having this ritual, because I can't remember the name of it, but it was a very powerful ritual. It was a high-level ritual. It was within his ability to cast, but he shouldn't have had it, because this ritual was... I can't remember the name of it, but... Basically, rituals come from various factions. You have Tremere rituals, which is a good chunk of them. The vast majority of them are either Tremere rituals or they're Sabbat rituals. However, there are a small number of rituals that belong to a group or created by a group called the Innocu or Innocui. I think it's the Innocu or the Innocui, depending on which one's correct. One of them just isn't, but maybe both. But this group called the Innocu or Innocui. And this group is a super secret collective of, like, vampires over the age of 1,000, more or less. That's what it is. It's essentially the Vampire Illuminati. I don't know much about them. I believe that it's theorized that they are the group in charge of both the Camarilla and the Sabbat, and that really the war between the Camarilla and the Sabbat is just two separate factions within the Innocu, or the Innocui, having a bit of a tiff that's been going on for a very long time. Suffice to say, they are incredibly old and incredibly scary, and they also have some fucking frightening magic. One of which is the ritual I used to hide this guy's house. Now, there is no explanation from having it. None. I think the closest we ever got is I had to spend a lot of points to get Boon as a merit, and the explanation was Kingsley, the name of the Primogen in our campaign, was that Kingsley knew it somehow, and Kingsley had this thing where he self-dominated himself all the time to hide parts of his own memories away from himself, because he basically did some dark shit and he didn't want people being able to read his mind, and he was kind of crazy and mentally broken because he did this to himself so often. So yeah, the explanation was he had this, he didn't know how he had it, but he knew he had this, and he gave it to his child to hide his mansion. And essentially what this ritual did, this mansion, his fucking townhouse, so what this ritual actually did was it kind of silenced the house. And if you can't remember, if you don't know what I'm talking about, in the Moffat era of Doctor Who, also known as the bad era of New Who, there were these creatures called the Silence, who, if I recall correctly, you could only see them when you were looking directly at them. And the minute you looked away, you forgot about them. And that your eyes, at any rate, kind of wanted to gloss over them. That was the effect that Damien's house had because of this ritual on anyone who didn't know the password that was more of a thought to which would allow you to see this house. Yeah. You could literally walk down the street and just not see it. Like, your eyes would just gloss over it. And if you were specifically instructed to look at it, you'd see it. I think the only chance you had to see it is if you already knew basically where it was. And even then, you had to make, like, a DC 9 perception check and get, like, a minimum number of successes to see it at all. Like, even if you knew where it was, if you didn't know what this password was, you had an incredibly hard time seeing it. And even then, if you succeeded, and you got there, and you, like, and so I broke the door, had a fight, and then left, as soon as you left, you'd forget where it was. You might remember what it looked like. You might remember what was inside. You might remember what went down. You might even remember that you were there. You would not remember where it was. Like, you could be standing outside of it, and you turn around, you can't see it anymore. Like, it was an obscenely powerful ritual. Absurdly powerful. I think, the 2 times anyone who wasn't specifically invited or didn't already know where it was and therefore knew the password got there. I believe the one time it was a gargoyle who was just sent there. And this gargoyle got a headache leaving. Because it barely got through the thing, and then it got a headache when I left. And the other time, I genuinely, for a call, it was a member of our party who needed to lie low for, like, a week. And nowhere is better to lie low than a house that you can't even look at without getting a headache. And even then, you'll forget about it as soon as you're gone. So literally, because my character didn't want anyone in the party knowing where he lived, if I recall correctly, I staked the guy. Like, he agreed to be staked. He was staked and kept in a cupboard for a week in this house. No one ever found this house. Nobody ever found this house. That's it, really. That's it as far as this guy's house. I'm gonna say 2 more things about Damien. Might be amusing because like literally there wasn't much to this guy. The 2 things are, number 1, this is related to the first one's related to the house. The second one isn't. In relation to the house. The end of that campaign, it ended quite badly. It basically ended with all of our campaign goals going more or less unfulfilled, and the city falling to the Sabbat because we interfered with things just enough to accidentally make sure they wouldn't go well, but not enough to actually help anything. So the city ended up falling to the Sabbat. Now, we did a bit of an epilogue, and it turned out that what ended up happening was after the city fell to the Sabbat, and it turned out that basically the other high-ranking NPC I was mentioning, high-ranking Tremere NPC, was a character called Amelia Beaufort, who was secretly a Barley, who was infiltrating the Tremere, and she was replacing Kingsley as the regent, but she was actually just trying to destabilize the Camarilla in the city because she was a secret Barley. After that was revealed, which it was, and after the Sabbat take over the city, which they do, in the epilogue, it's revealed that essentially what happens is Damien Saint-Claire and his dear dad Kingsley, are forced to abandon the kind of central chantry in New York because of, I think, a sect of rebel gargoyles completely fuck it up. Which means that, and the gargoyles end up getting recognized by both the Sabbat and the Camarilla as kind of as a faction in and of themselves, which essentially delegitimizes the presence of the Tremere. So Damien and Kingsley vanish into Damien's house, and they hide until the Camarilla takes the city back, and then they come out again, but they just kind of, they are the Tremere in the city, like those two, and then this kind of back and forth happens over and over again, where the Camarilla comes back, drives to the Sabbat, Damien and Kingsley will reappear and do some Tremere stuff, and then the city will fall to another power, be that Anarchs or Sabbat, so Damien and Kingsley just disappear into this house again, and that just happens over and over again, basically forever. Yeah, that was nature of the house. It's strong ritual. I mean, like, that did keep them safe forever. More or less. And it would, as long as that house exists, as long as you keep renewing that ritual. No one's ever going to find that house, unless you tell them what the password is. And the only two people who knew the password was Amelia, I think Amelia Beaufort, I think she died. Damien and Kingsley were the only people. So the two people living in it and one person who's dead were the only people who knew where that house was and how to get to it. Interesting. I'm going to tell you something else. One last thing about Damien. I'm going to skip the advice. I'll put that in another video. Damien, technically, as part of a joke that went too far, but it amused me, became, in the canon of, our little universe, of my group's kind of little history of our games, became what's known as an Inceptor. An Inceptor is a vampire who creates a new discipline. Essentially, Damien, because he was paranoid, and also because he was kind of a worrywart, and because of the dysfunction of our party, and also how genuinely unhelpfully crazy Kingsley is, because of his mind's scrambled, because he keeps, as I mentioned, he keeps forgetting things deliberately, which means his memory is very unstable, so his psychology is very unstable. He stressed out and freaked out a lot. And at one point I made a joke that Damien, out of pure stress, one of his eyes exploded. Just like, he heard something that drove him insane. He was just like, what the fuck? And just blood, just like a huge explosion of blood came out of his eye. And he never figured out. Like that just happened. And that happened so many times because of how frustrating the dysfunction in this party was. For the character, and also a little bit for me. That, like, this happened all the time. Like, whenever anything went wrong, bang! Past a certain point, one of his eyes would go. If something went horribly wrong, both of his eyes would go, and he'd, like, have to lose, like, 2 blood points. 1, to expend all that blood to blow his eyes out. And 2, to heal them back up again, because that was 1 point of damage. 1 point of lethal damage to explode your eyeballs. He eventually became an Inceptor, because past a certain point, the GM was just like, you know what? That's your discipline. You've got 1 dot for free. 1 dot of eye explosion. Amusingly, at one stage, he was held hostage. I can't remember why. I think it was just Sabbat Gangrel. Had just tied him up. And it actually came in handy. Because one of them got too close to him. Poof! His eye exploded and it blinded him and he got away. Stupid character. Stupid character in a bad campaign. But I was amused by him. Okay. It's quite late, which is why I'm giving up on the advice thing. I'll mention that at the beginning of my next episode. I don't know what story to do next, honestly. I know I am going to start on the clans. I am going to go through each clan one by one. However, I think that requires a bit more of a format. Not scripted, but a bit more of a, basically like a list of which points to hit in which order. So I'm going to need to work on that, so I'm not sure when the next episode will be. Yeah, I don't know what the next story will be, or when, but whenever it is, whatever it is, that's when I'll do my advice, which is in some way related to the dice in this this little cup here. I'm gonna go to bed. It's quite late and I've got uni stuff to do tomorrow. I'm almost done. Literally, I've got to get some feedback and then do a presentation. And then I'm out. I'm outie 5,000. But yeah, I'm done. Bye.